All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are. Welcome to day 2 of our Mojaloop PI-11 convening. It's very exciting to see you all here. I want to go over a few quick updates and housekeeping items before we begin. You already know where the agenda is, mojaloop.io/text. Most of the sessions today include foundation, community, business, and advocacy updates. So lots of great sessions to come. If you're looking for the link to this agenda, it's at mojaloop.io/DECKS, that's text. We also have the what to know for the PI-11 OSS community meeting. I'll see if I can drop that link in the chat there for all of you. There you go. And in that, you've got a couple of options. You can see who's attending. If you're looking for your Zoom registration information, that's there, and a quick link to the agenda, and a couple of other tips and small tricks here and there. Yesterday, there was a reference to a number of diagrams and images. You can find that in the PI-11 placemat. That's constantly updated, so get the latest version of that there. And you can see what everybody has been working on in the last PI on these 2 links, workstream updates and the objectives and the contacts. This is what the who's who looks like. It's a list of pretty much everybody who's attending this event. And it's great to see your pictures and your bios and your LinkedIn profiles. That's awesome. If you're wondering how to get your information here, there is an event attendee form. If you missed the link, I'll put that in the chat for you. Please, that link will send you to this page. Please feel free to fill in your name, company, your country, your LinkedIn, and a couple of other what you're doing in connection with Mojaloop. And if you can, please give us a headshot so that we are able to see your wonderful smiles and wonderful faces. This morning, we begin with foundation updates. We've got Paula Hunter, the Executive Director for the Mojaloop Foundation, and I'll pass it over to her. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you, Simeon, and welcome everyone. Let me get my screen up for you. Here we go. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We have quite the span of time zones here, and I appreciate those of you that are getting up extra early, as in Miller and Matt, and also appreciate those that are staying up quite late, Louis, Sam, and many others. Thank you all for joining us today. What I wanted to do today was share some good news about the Mojaloop Foundation. For those of you that have been working with the Mojaloop project for several years now, this is an important milestone, and I'm sure you've been anxious to see this day coming. For those of you that are new, we've had successfully launched the Mojaloop Foundation as of May 6, 2020. This is a celebratory event for us. We've been working towards this goal for some time now. So we did launch 2 months ago. Also notable is that when we launched on May 6th, we filed our paperwork with the Internal Revenue Service to become a registered nonprofit here in the United States. It usually takes about 6 months for the approvals. We just received notice this month that we were approved on July 7th in record time. So thanks to everyone that did some heavy lifting to help us submit that filing. It's an important part of our structure. It allows us to accept grants and operate as a legal nonprofit. So the team is very excited about this critical milestone. When we launched in May, we went out to the press and got some great coverage on the launch of the new foundation. We had a series of thought leadership blogs published, and we got great coverage around the globe in the formation of the Mojaloop Foundation. A lot of the press had already been familiar with the Mojaloop project, but this was our chance to go out and announce to the world that we were a legal entity and that we had a leadership team in place. We also turned on the spigots for social media. We had been quiet for the first 3 or 4 years of the Mojaloop project. We had not been actively using LinkedIn or Twitter. And I'm pleased to see that all of our sponsors and members have become very active with us on social media, which is an important way for us to get the word out to the broadest set of recipients about the launch of the foundation and our projects. So you'll continue to see active engagement on the social media platforms. And again, thank you to those of you that have started following us and amplifying our posts. Again, an important way for us to get messages out to the marketplace. Most notably, when we launched with 6 initial sponsors. These 6 sponsors are joining forces with us to accelerate digital payments in emerging economies. They include the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, COIL, Google, Modusbox, Omidyar Network, and the Rockefeller Foundation. And together our mission is to increase financial inclusion by empowering those organizations that are creating interoperable payment systems to enable digital financial services for all. So these 6 companies are mission aligned and technologically aligned with our mission, and will help us operate the foundation and oversee our governance. As I mentioned, we will operate as a charitable organization and maintain our open source software as a public good in service of financial inclusion. So we are not in the business of selling anything. We're in the business of education, advocacy, and enablement of using Mojaloop across the world. While many of you know we've been very focused on Africa for the last several years, we're certainly open to seeing the Mojaloop platform deployed all around the world, wherever it can directly affect financial inclusion. So we're delighted to see inquiries coming out of Asia, Indonesia, South America, and even United States and Europe. So we're region agnostic. We encourage participation in the community and the use of Mojaloop worldwide. We've definitely made some traction on the continent of Africa, and we'll continue focusing on that area because we've made some good progress. But that does not limit us in any way in expanding globally. And our intention is to engage with digital financial service providers, regulators, NGOs, and governmental offices looking to address the critical challenge faced by local underserved communities. But we can't do that alone. It's important for us to engage with all of you on this call today and continue to leverage your relationships and your staff that are on the ground talking to these organizations on a regular basis. And we want to make sure that we help you in providing the tools and the messages so that you can explain the benefits of Mojaloop to these constituencies. As far as our organization is concerned, we're led by a chairman of our board, which is Costa Perek from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We have a board of directors, officers, including a treasurer and a secretary, and we have our technical governing board. As executive director, I oversee the day-to-day operations of the organization, including Marcom and public relations, finance, governance, and operations, community management, and I'll put an asterisk next to design authority and release management and DevOps because those two functions have been operating independently for quite some time now. I think Simeon will be sharing with you some thoughts on how we will organize those functions for the long term through his work with the Community Leadership Committee. So these aren't, those two areas are more flexible as far as their reporting structure is concerned, and we want your input as a community on what makes most sense there with how those two functions are managed. As I mentioned, we have officers and a board of directors, which is represented by our founding sponsors. As chairman, Costa Peric leads the organization. We have Robert Ron as our treasurer. Robert is the CFO of Motusbox. And in addition to my role as the executive director, I serve as secretary of the organization. We also have a very skilled group of directors, that are overseeing our strategic direction, including David Wexler of Motusbox, Miller Abel of Gates Foundation, Kevin O'Neill from the Rockefeller Foundation, Adama Diallo of Google, Adrian Hope Bale from COIL, and CV Madiker from Omidyar Networks. All of these individuals bring interesting perspectives on the industry, on the geographies that we serve, and on the management and governance of a charitable entity. So we're delighted to have their expertise and support in our ongoing operations. We also have a technical governing board, which is currently chaired by Miller Abel, and includes Adrian Hopel, JJ Guex of Google, and Warren Carew of Motusbox. The charter of the Technical Governing Board is to plan and oversee all of the technical work conducted within the organization. The goal of the TGB is to ensure diversity of perspectives and approaches regarding the technical work at hand. And the TGB is empowered to make all decisions regarding technical direction, such as code release decisions, standards, document approvals, authorization of code maintainers, etc. That said, the TGB is very dependent on the community to articulate how the community wants to manage their activities, as you have been for the last 4 years. So we're not changing how you work. We're just adding a leadership structure that will be looking at our strategic direction from a technical standpoint and providing guidance and strategic advice to the community at large. So we'll certainly have the opportunity, I hope, to meet the TGB delegates face-to-face soon, but hopefully most of you are already familiar with these individuals, and if you have questions or comments that you'd like to convey to them, I'm sure they'll be happy to hear from you. The Mojaloop community is growing quite rapidly now. At our last convening, we had our group of community members and participants was well over 600 individuals across 5 continents and 34 countries. So that is continuing to grow. And this community is quite diverse, obviously geographically diverse, but also the 659 participants is not just developers. There's business people that are interested in deploying Mojaloop. There are government representatives, regulators, etc. So a very diverse group of people that are monitoring our activities and our progress, and are recipients of our ongoing newsletters and other communications. We want to make sure that we continue to build that group of participants across the board, geographically and functionally, to make sure that we have good coverage across the ecosystem. So now that we are a legal entity, what will change? Well, first of all, we'll probably see some new members joining. In fact, in the next few weeks, we'll be happy to be announcing new board members, new TGB delegates, and new members to the Mojaloop Foundation. We'll also be focusing on providing additional support for the community. Tools, education, product management, all of those activities are well underway from a planning standpoint, and we hope to start rolling out some of those support elements soon. You'll also see an increased emphasis on accelerating deployments and making sure that in whatever way myself, the Mojaloop Foundation, and our board delegates can do to help accelerate deployments, please don't hesitate to contact us and seek that support. We want to do everything we can to remove barriers, to address any concerns, and help you be successful in deploying Mojaloop out into the marketplace. And we'll see continued evolution of the community function via the Community Leadership Committee, which I'm sure Simeon will be talking about more here shortly. So how can you engage? First of all, you can become a Mojaloop member, and I'll speak to that in a moment. You can join our newly forming marketing steering group, and you can also participate and contribute to the development of educational and training programs. So we'll be reaching out and sharing information about these initiatives over the next few weeks, but I thought I'd spend a few moments telling you how you can engage more directly. First of all, you can join the Mojaloop Foundation as a member. It's a way for you to signal your support of our financial inclusion mission. It's a way for you to be eligible to serve on the technical governing board. And it also helps fund the ongoing operations and initiatives. Again, we are a charitable entity. We have no products to sell, so we depend upon the grants and contributions of our members to feed the ongoing operations and those initiatives. Our membership structure is pretty simple. We have two tiers. We have a sponsor level and we have a promoter level. The sponsor level is the level by which the 6 initial founders joined the foundation. And again, their annual fee of $200,000 is an important contribution to our launch and our operations. And then the promoter level allows for a tiering of dues based on company revenue. So it's a more affordable way for you to signal to the marketplace that you are committed to the Mojaloop Foundation and the Mojaloop Project and helping us achieve our mission. But there's no charge to be a community member, and the vast majority of you that are on the call today are members of our community, and we're delighted to have you. And of course, would not be charging you to be a community member. We value your contribution and encourage you to stay on and continue to contribute to the community. And again, Simeon will be talking a little bit more about new initiatives there. There's also a new marketing steering group that'll be meeting in the next few weeks. The proposed charter of the steering group is to engage and leverage the collective wisdom of the community. So that's going to be something that's under discussion on our inaugural call. The mission of the marketing steering group is to ensure clear and strong alignment between the overall Mojaloop Foundation goals and strategy and marketing communications deliverables and plans. It will enable sponsor-level member companies to provide input on the direction of the strategic marketing communications of the foundation, but also tap into the technical, business, and market knowledge of the community to provide direction and content to our staff. As I mentioned, those 600 plus people that we consider part of our broadest community all have collective wisdom and perspective on what's happening in local markets, and will help us fine-tune our messaging and hopefully help us in development and production of content. The structure of the group, once formed and launched, we will have 2 co-chairs. Sponsor-level member companies can be co-chairs. Promoter-level member companies may participate with no restrictions. We'll be meeting on a regularly agreed-upon schedule and provide updates to the board of directors on a quarterly basis. So if you're interested in joining the marketing steering group, by all means, send me a note. And as we get ready to launch the inaugural call, we'll send you a message out and let you know how to participate. But again, this is, we have not even started this group yet. It's really just in the formative stages. So if you're interested in making an impact and making contribution, now's a great time to jump on. As far as the future is concerned, our top priorities in the next few months, first of all, is to hire a product manager. We recognize that the community has been working very hard in prioritizing the work streams and understanding the requirements of the product roadmap. The product manager will help help the community prioritize workstream efforts, but also get a better sense of where we stack up as an offering into the marketplace with respect to what else is available to folks in the area of financial inclusion. So we need to do more due diligence on what's going on in the marketplace, what our gaps are, and help fill those gaps over the long term. We also need to develop tools to promote Mojaloop and reduce barriers to acceptance. I've been getting a number of inquiries from folks about how do I sell Mojaloop? How do I convince people that open source software is a safe and reliable path to deploy this type of platform? So we need to develop those tools, and those tools will come in a wide range of formats, electronic, webinars, blogs, and other video content. So stay tuned as we start to roll out those tools. We also need to establish thought leadership and provide case studies and success stories out to the marketplace to show traction and show that we have momentum and are making forward progress. We also are looking at organizing additional and participating in additional events, hackathons, and meetups to increase collaboration. These 4 convenings that we have each year are very important, but we need to broaden our footprint and participate in other activities as well. So if there are particular events that you want our support on as far as a speaker or participation, do let us know, and we'll do our best to support them. Of course, taking in mind that we do continue to have travel restrictions, which we all hope will change soon. And then finally, we need to build out a training and education program. We need to increase the capacity of resources that are available across the world that can implement, manage, and support Mojaloop deployments. So we are currently starting the planning right now for our training and education program. I'll pause and see if, let me check and see if there's any questions. I don't see any yet. So just continue on with a few more key points. We have a lot of support. Many of these individuals are on the phone here today from an organization, a company called Virtual Inc. They're providing our membership onboarding, meeting and events. Alyssa, who's on the phone today, is overseeing the coordination of this convening, and also when we have them, our face-to-face events. We have communications in both public relations and marketing. Megan Cannon, who's on the phone today, drives community management operations, supporting Simeon. We have board and technical governing board secretariat, so providing meeting schedules, agendas, and meeting minutes. Operations and administrative functions, finance, all of our monthly reporting and such, paying the bills, and IT, managing our website and corporate email. So this is our back office team that keeps the operation functioning and certainly makes my life easier. There are some key contacts here. Hopefully, if you need any assistance, either myself or Simeon can help you out, but it's also good to know some of the key leads in community operations and such, including Megan, again, community operations. Amanda Bryan is doing all our secretariat work, Trisha King, a program manager, Bree McGahey, our marketing lead. She will be coordinating the marketing steering group function. Jessie Hennian, who some of you have already met through her public relations efforts. She's regularly looking for speaking opportunities for us. She's also looking for blogging content. So if you have topics, she'd love to hear from you. And again, Alyssa is our event manager. I have a question from the floor about what time frame are you looking to onboard a product manager? The sooner the better. So I have not posted the rec publicly yet, but I will be shortly, and like to get that going as quickly as we can hire up. And then finally, I just wanted to say we miss you all. I really wish we were doing this live in, I think we were planning on Nairobi this cycle, And we also have hopes. We were going to Zanzibar in October. I'm not going to make any official announcements with regard to October yet, but you all know that the situation is quite tenuous as far as travel is concerned. We continue to monitor that, and we'll give you an update on the October plans probably within the next few weeks. But we do thank you for joining us virtually. I know for some of you it's very early or very late in your day. It's hard to spend 5 hours on a Zoom call, but we do appreciate your attention and participation. So with that, I'll thank you. I see no further questions, so I'll pass it over to Simeon.
Thank you so much, Paula. I'll jump straight into my presentation and give a couple of community updates. I will begin sharing my screen now. Just give me a heads up if you can all see that.
Yes, we.
Awesome, thank you so much. So I have a couple of quick community updates from the foundation. The community management function has been pretty active over the last 5 months that I've been with Mojaloop Foundation, and we've got some really great updates that I'd like to share. And I'll organize them into 3 simple categories. One, a quick update on community strategy, which I did speak about at the last convening. We presented the community strategy, and we've been implementing quite a big part of it, and I'll give updates on that. I've been responsible for the onboarding as well, work stream for the community. So I've got a few updates on that, and then some things to look forward to. So let's start with community strategy. Just to give an overview, we had 3 basic objectives in the last PI. One was to recruit and operationalize the Community Leadership Committee, or what we shortly call CLC. We also wanted to draft contributor license agreements, CLAs, and community code of conduct. And then thirdly, finalize strategic targets for the community strategic direction. And what that is, if you don't know, is a simple agenda for the community, what the community would like us to think through and implement over the next weeks and months. The CLC has been fully constituted. These are the names of the people that sit on the committee, on this committee. And this committee meets once a week, every Thursday. And the goal of this committee is essentially, the CLC is the voice or the representative voice of the community in the Mojaloop Foundation's governing structure. And so we have different people from different corners of our community, some technical, some business people, some with different skill sets. And I just want to list them here so that you're aware of who these people are. So this is done and finished. So what has the committee been up to? One of the things that we've spent doing this last PI is working on a code of conduct. You can find the slides to this in the agenda. And in the code of conduct, you'll find linked in there the draft code of conduct and a link to discourse to give your feedback. So what have we done? We have written it out, the code of conduct. That's the link that you see at the top of your screen there. We have discussed this with the CLC and negotiated on different wordings and come up with what is in the document right now. We're now opening up community consultation. And this is a process that will go on continuously. This is an opportunity for you to give your feedback at any time on the code of conduct. And the code of conduct is something that we see evolving with the community as the community grows as well. And so if you have any feedback or any thoughts, things that you feel you would want to put into the code of conduct or take out or make a comment on or add processes to, please go to the link in the discourse link there. And at any time there's a proposal that will be shared with the CLC for consideration. We have submitted the code of conduct to the TGB. They've had a chance to discuss it and have given feedback. And we're hoping to get the TGB's final approval at their next meeting. To make it simpler as well on these discourse links, in the session, in the agenda, there's linked the discussion thread for this session. I've posted all the discourse links there, so it's you have one easy place to access all of them. The other thing the CLC has been working on is the CLAs, the Contributor License Agreement. Again, we did develop an individual and a corporate CLA. We discussed it within with the CLC. We have a draft implementation plan that's being led by Lewis and a couple of others within the CLC. And again, today we're opening up a community consultation. Once more, there's a discourse link in there. At any point, now or in the future, if you have any thoughts or opinions or ideas on the CLA, you can go to that link and submit your thoughts there. Every single submission will be shared with the CLC for discussion and approval. It is important for me to note that we later made a decision to have just one CLA as opposed to a different individual and a different corporate CLA. But we will be making provision for to enable corporate organizations sign the CLA, and that's part of the implementation plan that we're currently working on. Again, we have submitted the CLAs to the TGB. They have had an opportunity to discuss it, and we're hoping to get a final approval for the CLA at their next meeting. The other thing is a community strategic direction. Essentially, the community strategic direction documents a raft of recommendations and a plan of action aimed at building a strong and diverse community of participants around Mojaloop. And so these are just some of the points that are listed in the community strategic direction. If you go to Discourse, there's a link to the actual document, and you can add your thoughts and share your feedback on it. Some of the things that the community is working on is, one, figuring out what are shared ideals. Some of these have been codified within the code of conduct. We're looking at a community membership model. Have a clear membership profiles. How do people answer the questions of how people acquire membership, and what are the terms of engagement. We're also looking at our community working structures. Historically, we've been organized around different work streams that the community votes for based on roadmap voting items. And we want to we'll take a look at this structure one more time and see how effective these workflows are and how to improve the effectiveness. And then among many other ideas that the CLC has discussed is stakeholder engagement, which is essentially a strategy on creating awareness and positioning Mojaloop as the thought leader in this ecosystem, in the financial inclusion space. We would like your input to collaborate with the CLC on developing the community strategic direction. Once more, a very straightforward way to do that is to click on that link, and that takes you straight to Discourse. And there's a number of other linked documents in there. As soon as you review them, you have the opportunity to put your provide your thoughts and your feedback. Again, any thought and any feedback that is posted in that thread will be shared with the CLC for their consideration. So that's community strategy. I want to focus on onboarding as the second bucket of work. In terms of onboarding objectives, the objectives here were to have an end-to-end review of the onboarding process, and essentially just provide updated documentation. And so in the process evaluation, what we try to do is we decide to ask 3 simple questions. And some of you have been helpful in helping us evaluate the onboarding process as it currently exists. 1, is it clear to new contributors how to get started? Some people said yes, and we did hear from quite a few people who were very unsure about it, or said that it could be clearer. 2, are communication and coordination happening in the open? For the most part, yes. There's lots of community calls for different work streams and conversations ongoing on Slack. Is a process for code reviews and merges clear? For most people who have raised a pull request on GitHub or tried collaborating with us on that platform, would usually say yes, it's pretty clear. And so in updating that documentation, we have 3 pillars that we're or principles that we're looking to guide how to develop, update the documentation. 1, we're creating a new dev hub, which is sort of a streamlined page, which brings together all the different places where we've put up onboarding documentation and provide it in a nice, simple, easy to understand format. we're introducing pathways of contributing, or at least highlighting the pathways of contributing and making it much, much clearer. These are listed here. Some of them are still not operational, and we will need the help of some of the community members to help us operationalize a couple of these ideas. The three that I want to highlight here that are ideas we're toying around with is one, how to create pathways for non-developer contributions. Those people who want to belong to a community but do not necessarily have the technical skills but want to contribute, how can they contribute? Two, people who work on design would like to have to create opportunities for designers to participate in or to contribute to Mojaloop. And then translation. And the idea around translation is the more languages Mojaloop speaks, the more we're able to get it deployed around the world in the languages that people speak and understand. And then three, we also hope to frequently announce releases and the contributors to each release. One of the things that we're big on in the community management function is we do want to publicly acknowledge and recognize everybody who has submitted a line of code or made some kind of contribution that leads to the release of either a new version of Mojaloop components or another related pieces. The new Dev Hub will sit at dev.mojaloop.io. That doesn't exist yet. The content draft is actually complete and open for feedback and review. That draft, you can find it in that link and the discourse. And we ask that you use the discourse thread to suggest any changes or make any proposals. And we look forward to your feedback on that. The last bucket here is looking ahead. And in summary, there are three broad categories of work that we're looking to do in the next PI within the community strategy function. One, in advocacy and outreach, we do want to expand our contributor base through hackathons. And the idea behind the hackathons is we want to help more people become familiar with Mojaloop tools. And so that whenever there are opportunities in their own countries to work or use Mojaloop, there'll be a pool of developer resources in country that people can tap into. We're thinking through ideas for developing a global ambassadors program. And the idea is these ambassadors would be country level representatives who run advocacy campaigns and events for Mojaloop for and on behalf of the Mojaloop Foundation. In terms of governance, I already mentioned that going to next PI, we'll be taking a hard look at community membership structures and workflows and making sure that it's clear for everybody how they can become a community member and how they can participate, all the way from making your first pull request up until participating in the leadership and governance committees and the pathways that connect the two of those things. Paula referred to in her earlier presentation, restructuring community governance committees. The CLC has had an opportunity to rethink how the Change Control Board, that's a CCB, the Design Authority, and the CLC works. And we're thinking everything from the makeup of these committees, their scope and their mandate, pathways for community members to participate in these committees, and to rise through the ranks through leadership in these committees. These these ideas are currently within discussion at the CLC, and you will hear more about them. We'll post a bunch of them on discourse so that you can make your contributions to that, to those conversations as well as we move on. In terms of ecosystem development, Paula and myself have engaged a number of entrepreneurs and people in the business community who are interested in using Mojaloop, or who are interested in understanding the business proposition for Mojaloop and how they can engage and use it. Yesterday, we had a lot of people from the fintech community raise similar concerns. Going forward, we will be taking a couple of initiatives to directly reach out to the entrepreneurs and the larger business community to, one, understand their needs, and to work with them and collaborate with them to think through how, what structures or what tools we can provide them to participate in the community and to and also to benefit from Mojaloop. Those are my thoughts right now. I will stop there and just quickly check if I don't see any questions. And because we're out of time, I will quickly pass this on to our next presenter, Zachary Kazzaz, Chris Calabia, and Elizabeth McQuerry from Glenbrook Partners, who will talk through driving financial inclusion from the middle, how Mojaloop can support DFSPs in reaching the last mile. Elizabeth, take it away.
Yeah, there we go. Got the presentation. Thank you. That's magic. Good morning, good afternoon, evening, everyone. What we'd like to share with you today is the findings from some really kind of tactical research that we did over the last few months that was looking at the challenge that was, or is still, but the challenge of getting emergency disbursement funds to individuals, largely by governments, but there have been some philanthropies involved in this. And the challenge of getting those funds to people quickly and safely during this period of COVID-19. So Zach, if you could push forward. And I'm going to give you a setup here, and then I'm going to pass it to Chris Calabia from the Gates Foundation, who spurred us on to do this work, which I think we're going to very quickly bring this around to why this is important to Mojaloop potentially and to the community. So when you think about the period of COVID-19 and the challenges that has presented, you know, even if you wanted to open a new transaction account, you were not able to just easily go to the agent or to the DFSP, branch of whatever sort it is. So we needed to look for remote opportunities. And of course, we've often thought that eKYC and simplified due diligence were important tools for bringing digital financial inclusion to the poor. And now we see an amazing example of how it can truly work. Of course, this implies that there are, in the regulatory basis in each country, that we have the enabling environment. And of course, there's not going to be any one size fits all. But I think what this research shows is that there are tools and regulatory fundamentals that can make it easy to open accounts for many people very, very quickly if needed. So what we see is that, you know, we'll show you some numbers, but in a period of 3 or 4 months, more than 60 million accounts were opened in just a few countries. We'll show you the data on this because it's pretty hard to believe that all of this was able to happen so quickly. But these are a handful of countries that had the right ingredients in place at the right time. Of course, it's just a handful of countries that had this tremendous success. And what could we do as a community, which is really why we wanted to bring this to you, and what could Mojaloop as a platform do to, if you will, broaden the availability of these type of tools? We think that there is tremendous potential for the payment platform to simplify the needed DFSP responsibilities, and we'll talk about what those are, to simplify those and make this capability more available on across a payment scheme. If we could go to the next slide, please, Zach. Thanks. So I mentioned simplified KYC, eKYC. That's kind of the traditional name, and more recently this is kind of morphed into a term called customer due diligence. And largely some of the same things, but it's a incrementally expanding category of what we need to do as financial services providers to understand who we're doing business with, where those funds are coming from, whether it's an individual or a business, and to have an understanding of what the nature and source of the client as well as the funds are. And these are, if you will, standards that have largely been developed through the Financial Action Task Force, which is a standard setting body that largely determines what should happen with anti-money laundering and other know your customer type environments. And this is globally. So what is customer due diligence? Certainly on the account opening side, we need to have one-to-one ID of who the customer is. We want to make sure that that is correct. And beneficial ownership is the term that describes who is the account really for? What sort of, is the funds really for this individual? Is it for a business? And what's the underlying nature of that business? Who is it really benefiting? Want to make sure it's for the purposes which are stated. And there needs to be some risk assessment in that from the financial institution. And this is at the front end, just opening the account. And that's the part we're going to focus on today. Of course, customer due diligence is about the life cycle of the relationship with the customer, which includes, the transactions that they make and also when they close their account. However, we're not going to focus on that part today. I'm going to turn the next part of the presentation over to Chris Calabia, who's going to focus in on the regulatory aspects of this and how we got to where we are today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And Zach, let's stay on this slide for just a couple more moments, if you don't mind. So as Elizabeth mentioned, my name is Chris Calabia, and I work at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I lead our work on supervisory and regulatory policy. And prior to joining the foundation, I was a banking regulator in the United States for 25 years. And I also worked with one of the international standard settings bodies for bank regulators. The concept of customer due diligence is often thought of as understanding who your customer is, and hence the more common term, know your customer rules. But in reality, customer due diligence is meant to give insight into the risk profile of a customer seeking to open an account with a financial institution. When the financial institution has a better understanding of what that person is likely to use the account for, what the source of their funds are, what types of transactions they're likely to use, and what type of services they're likely to use at a firm, it's much easier for the firm to monitor the account and understand when it may need to investigate what looks like anomalous behavior. As a simple example, if a consumer comes to open a bank account or an e-money account and represents that he is a student who is unemployed but is a full-time student, the institution might be surprised if that student kept showing up with large cash deposits. That might suggest that there's a need to understand better where those funds are coming from and why the student is making those deposits. And so that is ultimately the purpose for customer due diligence. The other thing I would say is that remember that the things that we're trying to prevent here are the abuse of the financial system and the abuse of a financial account. In particular, we're trying to protect against money laundering and the financing of terrorism. And money laundering is really not a victimless crime. In fact, some of the most heinous crimes can be associated with money laundering, whether that's human trafficking, modern day slavery, trade in illegal narcotics and weapons, proceeds of corruption and crime. All of these things abuse the financial system. Similarly, the financing of terrorism is often done through the formal financial system. And these abuses can fall heavily on society's poorest and most vulnerable, who may themselves, for example, be victims of trafficking or otherwise bear the cost of these types of crimes. And international and domestic authorities take these crimes quite seriously, and we want to ensure that Mojaloop deployments will not be abused in the future, and instead will serve their intended purpose of benefiting and including the poor in the modern economy. And so Elizabeth has gone over the basic features of customer due diligence, the account opening, and how this is a responsibility for institutions, not just upon opening, but also throughout the life of the relationship, and also the responsibility that institutions have to exit accounts if they determine that the risk of money laundering or terrorist financing or engaging in fraud is high, unacceptably high, and is necessary to close the account. So let's turn to the next slide. And we'll talk a little bit about where these standards came from and how they came to be. So they were promulgated, as Liz mentioned, by the Financial Action Task Force, which is an intergovernmental organization that issues recommendations that are not legally, literally binding, but in practice, member countries commit to implementing FATF standards, and most countries in the world seek to apply these standards in some form. Now, FATF does have quasi-enforcement powers. They have the ability to issue views on whether a country has adopted its requirements appropriately. And if not, it has the ability to call out those countries publicly, and even includes the ability to do what's called gray list or blacklist certain countries. That is, identify them as being weak or exceptionally weak in the application of these standards. And that can be quite challenging because when that happens, other countries' financial institutions may become quite reticent about doing business in those countries or with particular financial institutions that are viewed as being weak in applying these anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing standards. And so that's important to bear in mind, that the consequences of failing to comply with these standards can be quite severe. If we look at the history of the application of the Financial Action Task Force requirements prior to 2008, virtually all customers were expected to be treated the same way. That is, all institutions were expected to vet them to similar standards. And this is particularly problematic in lower and middle income countries and other countries with large unbanked populations, because in many cases, people who are unbanked or poor, and in many countries women, may lack access to traditional identity documentations that you and I might be familiar with, like birth certificates, national identity cards or numbers and passports and so on. And about 20% of people globally who are unbanked say that one reason that they are unbanked is they lack access to appropriate documentation to pass these know your customer due diligence requirements and so on. FATF, to its credit, recognized that this was problematic, and that when you leave people out of the system, you actually increase the risk of money laundering and terrorist financing, because those people will rely on the informal financial sector, which is not as well monitored, if at all, in many countries. And so in 2008, FATF introduced the concept of the risk-based approach to its standards, basically saying that in lower risk situations, countries may permit more simplified approaches to applying some of FATF standards, and in higher risk situations, they would be expected to apply more stringent standards. Initially, there were not a lot of guidance provided on these risk-based approaches, and so some countries like Mexico began to experiment with low or even no documentation required for opening accounts, which was criticized by FATF. So in 2012 and 2013, FATF started to articulate more clearly what its expectations are for applying risk-based approaches. And one important concept that was introduced in 2012 is the notion of simplified due diligence. That is, a simpler way of applying customer due diligence for accounts that are considered to be low risk, from customers that are considered to be low risk, and for which there are appropriate controls around the accounts. And some of these controls include things like setting very strict limits on the number of transactions that can be done, the total value of the account, or the value of transactions into or out of the account that can be done at any one time. And so this application of simplified due diligence first became possible in 2012. And increasingly, as research that Glenbrook has done on this particular subject shows, more and more countries have begun to use simplified due diligence as a means of opening accounts for unbanked individuals who are expected to really transact in only very small figures, very small sums, and have very small accounts in general. And so many countries are increasingly opening up sort of tiered accounts, as they're known, using simplified due diligence. In some countries, the concept is called tiered KYC, but in reality, the more formal term would be simplified due diligence. And so I will stop there and turn it back over to Elizabeth.
Thanks. I'm going to actually let Zach finish us off here.
Great. Thanks, both. So in thinking about what the tools we have to really reach simplified due diligence is that we've pared it down to essentially these four. Each one of these can be taken individually or together, but the concept behind it is that there's no secret sauce for how you can reach the last mile in terms of financial inclusion, in terms of account onboarding. And so each market needs to experiment with the methods that work for them based on the existing structures, both from a government side and from the private sector. To go through these 4 darts we have, right, we're trying to get that bullseye. Is the first one here is basic accounts, and that's what Chris was just talking about, that low tier account where there are generally limits on velocity on the maximum balance. In exchange for that, there are limited ID requirements. The next is the use of alternative IDs. So in many markets, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, the ID penetration is quite low, or there's no federal identity whatsoever, as is the case in Ethiopia. Here, there's an opportunity to use IDs such as employer IDs. In Jordan, they actually built the system around using a UN refugee ID from UNHCR in place of a Jordanian ID so people could have access to mobile financial services. Moving to remote onboarding. This is something that was, of course, important before COVID, but now the importance of it has really magnified it, and quite quickly. Remote onboarding, many processes that exist in place today have multiple steps that you can do online, but then there's still an in-person verification that needs to be done, confirming your information against a document, confirming you're a person against whatever you've submitted online. Conceptually, we want to move away from that, to think about a process that is fully automated end-to-end, so that a user does not have to add their personal health risk to go in and interact with an agent, potentially remove their mask, as masks, of course, make that facial matching much more complicated in person. And the last piece here is digital identity and eKYC. These two often go together, but full disclosure, they do not need to. Digital ID, we're referring to the broader infrastructure of a digital instance of someone's identity. The most well-known one and most established is, of course, Aadhaar in India, though there are many other instances of them that are on a smaller scale or being rolled out. It doesn't exactly require that level of infrastructure and investment. And eKYC is pinging that check digitally. So here's really the money slide in terms of what did we see from some of these simplified measures in a fairly small amount of time. Just to look across these are done on essentially per 100,000 adults. So in the first column, Brazil, that is basically saying 1 in 4 adults in Brazil had access to government disbursements and had no account starting. The main takeaway I want to show here is that these are the results of what happens if you can put together a remote onboarding, you can put together remote onboarding, simplified due diligence, and get things ready to go. A bunch of these markets in emergency times were really able to rapidly ramp up the use of digital funds. And to think about the total number here, this 60 million beneficiaries with new accounts, this is huge. This would be, this is about 4% of the unbanked population in the world. And just for a point of comparison, between 2014 to 2017, in that 3-year period, lots of investment. And there were only 300 million new accounts or new people who became financially included. And so to think that 60 million people could become included in just a matter of months is really extraordinary. And provides an interesting roadmap to think about for the future. Now, thinking about what the network could do, because of course that's why we're here and thinking about the Mojaloop community. Of course, not all aspects of CDD are relevant for a network. However, there are a few, the ones that you can see bolded in a color: identification, verification, beneficial ownership, and transaction monitoring, where there is a place for a central network or a scheme to take part. On remote onboarding, this can involve the reusage of SIM details, having a mobile interface, or a white labeled application. These things aren't pie in the sky ideas. BIM in Peru, NPCI in India, they both have some version of this where the scheme actually runs the mobile interface and then the user selects the banking institution or non-bank financial institution that they want to work with. NPCI has a fully white labeled solution that banks can use on their own. It's still done from a central point, but the process flow goes through the switch and then the account is boarded to the bank. The other and newer idea here is collaborative CDD. The concept behind that is that there are multiple sources of data And is there a way to streamline them so that they can be used more effectively as one central point? Similarly here, we're talking about a data warehouse of transactions, creating an independent identity score. This exists today in Kenya. There's a third-party identity score, but for this scheme to be able to do that, and then that information can flow back to the banks. Thinking about this conceptually, and this is just illustrative, about where some of the efficiencies could be gained, we wanted to put together these diagrams. And in full disclosure, the diagram on the left is even a little already simplified, because in many countries there isn't an ID database or a central ID or a centralized ID repository. So the DFSPs are actually reaching out to a multitude of other sources to verify a new user. But assuming there is an ID database, each DFSP would be responsible for connecting to it independently, in addition to their connections to the RTRP platform. Ideally, in a future state, they could connect through the RTRP platform, and with that same link, funnel both payment and identity information with the more advanced RTRP platform compared to their technological infrastructure that has a better capacity to ping into an ID database. So just about at the top of our time, so just wanted to give a little plug that, we recently wrote a larger paper about this, about simplified due diligence and customer due diligence and some of the challenges and opportunities. If you'd like to learn more, the link is here. You can search for that title, and we're always happy to engage in conversation on this topic. All right, and I think I will turn it back to the Mojaloop team to get us moving. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Zach. I see a couple of questions in the chat as well as in the Q&A. If you want to respond to those via text, that would be awesome.
Yeah, of course.
Excellent. We've got a 10-minute break, so we will take a 10-minute break now until 10 minutes past the hour. And then we'll come back with the cross-network report out led by Michael Richards, John Hope Bailey, and Zach, I see you listed here as well. So we'll be happy to see your face again in 8 minutes.